A non-rigged but rigged election. My goodness, what a terrible election result. A real slap in the face to all those people who have suffered immensely, especially the kids. Was the voting rigged? There's always a chance. I can see rigging, but it's not in the way that certain people are saying, or not saying as is the case. Let's look at a bit of a bigger picture and a bunch of things in no particular order. Some big, some small, but they all add up to pretty much deliver the results that we've now got to deal with. 1. Influencers don't have big audiences as compared to mainstream media, ABC and radio. ABC were pretty much pro-Labor during the campaigning phase, so it's perhaps fair to say the ABC lovies didn't vote for any of the Liberty parties or for the Liberals. 3. All Victorians have grown up with the ABC at some point and are swayed to see them as a trusted, non-biased news source. 4. A swathe of Victorians are just never going to question the institutions they've been brought up to trust, from police, research centres, universities, media, authority figures, and so on and so forth. 5. We have Sky News behind a paywall in Melbourne, where most of Victoria's population is. They never saw commentary from the likes of Rowan Dean. 6. If you talk to strangers on the street, most never saw the record-breaking protests. 7. Those who did see the protests through the lens of a mainstream report were told that the protesters were bad people and even Nazis, while the numbers were greatly underestimated.
But some trade union heavies were quick to paint the majority of protesters as far-right agitators and Nazis, which the media lapped up. Here is CFMEU boss Dave Noonan on the ABC.
There were very few of our members involved in what went on there today. What you've seen is a group of people from all sorts of places, but there has been a very clear attempt by anti-vax groups and indeed some extreme right neo-Nazi groups to get massive demonstrations on the streets of Melbourne.
The genuine reasons why people protested and faced down massive fines, police brutality and likely arrests were never aired and purposefully misrepresented. 8. We have mainstream media who never seem to cover any of the terrible, terrible consequences of finding this new COVID normal. I'm sure if they kept telling their viewers about the consequences, people would have voted differently. 9. We have mainstream radio as well. You had Neil Mitchell on 3AW, who did some great but terribly heart-wrenching interviews in 2020. Broken fathers cried on air. Specialists who work with children discussed the tragic and off-the-charts increased suffering that children were experiencing, enough to get people out to protest. But he would still label protesters as Nazis in 2022, just before the election. Okay. Stations such as Triple M and Triple J just went along with pretty much everything, government mandates and all their listeners vote. 10. Mainstream news would completely ignore the federal police stating that the Melbourne lockdowns created a smorgasbord for pedophiles grooming and abusing children online. Maybe Neil Mitchell might try and understand how this might drive people out into the streets and protests, but no, they're Nazis. Again, talk to the average person on the street. No one knew about the increase in abuse, and they all vote. And again, I think people would have voted differently if they were constantly reminded of these other consequences. 11. I've heard so many stories of complete family breakdowns because the black sheep in the family would speak up. They were so often outnumbered in their families. All these family members vote and greatly outnumber the black sheep. 12. You have the allegory of Plato's cave. I covered that ages ago. Essentially, it is very challenging to pull people out of the cave and away from their shadow reality being played out on the wall by sinister types. You can watch it here. 13. You have people who will never believe that a government-mandated banana will ever be wrong. They have lived their whole lives being told that bananas are the way to go. 14. How many people outside of these social bubbles and echo chambers that we now find ourselves in do we actually talk to? I had footage of the many paper crosses at a protest where doctors spoke up. Some represented children. When asked by one onlooker what it was, I told him and he told me to go F myself. People don't want to leave their Plato's cave and they all vote. 15. Look around you. There are still a tremendous number of people wearing masks, especially in the city, coming up to 3 years now. Still fearful after a solid and very expensive propaganda machine that paid for all the salaries of the mainstream news employers and increased the share price of mainstream TV channels. 16. You have a swathe of people who just don't understand economics and have no interest in the economy and have no comprehension of what this monumental mountain of new debt means, or that the debt is going to get far worse because of mega government projects, including a suspicious railway line and entirely uprooting Victoria's energy production and delivery systems over the next 25 years. 17. We have 4 years of newly graduated 18 to 21-year-olds who have been indoctrinated with all sorts of agendas for at least 1 decade, especially on man-made climate change. That triggers them to voting a certain way on election day. It may take several elections for them to leave this cave. They may never leave the cave. 18. You have so many Greens voters who probably don't care or don't know that their elected leaders will laugh at adverse events, to the point that they're laughing at children who are no longer with us or who will live out a severely adverse life. Would they also laugh at the severe mental suffering of children witnessed by so many child specialists in Melbourne? Maybe they don't know about the consequences. 19. We have a system of compulsory voting where so many people have no idea of what they are really voting for or how to vote. 20. Even when I'm playing Sudoku on an app, political ad campaigns would pop up in between extreme level games, of which I'm trying to beat my 2-minute 18-second record, saying that the Great Barrier Reef is still dying. People will believe this and they vote. 21. I spoke to some first-time voters who in the same uttered paragraphs would say, "Do you want to vote for the future of the earth? I'm voting for my kids' kids." And then also go on to say that they would never vote for communist socialist parties because of their extended family living in some place such as Iran, and then go on and vote for the Greens. 22. It has been the case for generations that most education completely avoids teaching about the voting system in Victoria and how it came about. People largely don't know how the voting system works. 23. Okay, halfway through now. If you think education is or has become indoctrination, you can help me build a new exceptional online educational resource platform where presenters such as Dr. Peter Ridd dispel the myths surrounding the Great Barrier Reef. Go to truearrowevents.com to learn more. 24. An estimated 100,000 Victorians deserted Victoria, their ability to vote taken with them. Some even left the authoritarian fight in their own countries for the safety of Australia and then left Victoria once the fight started here. Not much help. 25. You had people who still thought that they could vote for Australia One, Bossy's party, that never eventuated, and somehow thought that maybe, and still do, that Bossy can somehow magically become the next Australian Prime Minister. I understand Bossy didn't start a party because the current system is illegal or something like that. So maybe his followers didn't end up voting? No idea. 26. We have tradies and those in construction choosing to vote Labor despite what they've been through over the last 2.5 years because Labor is promising them work well into the future and other people aren't.
Now, regardless of what we think about Dan Andrews, everyone's got their own opinion. We actually need Labor to get in. Matthew Guy said he's going to stop the rail crossing removals. He will stop that. He will stop the schools being built. He will stop the hospitals being built. So the message from our union leaders, the executives, was you're not voting for Dan Andrews, you vote for your fucking job. Yeah, regardless of what we think about the man himself, everyone's going to have their own opinion, and that's fine. He goes, but we need to vote for our jobs. At the moment, they said we've got work for the next 10, 15 years. Our kids will start apprenticeships, probably finish them with the work that they've got earmarked. So when you do go to vote for your jobs. Like John just said, we don't tell anybody how to vote. Everyone's got their, do whatever they need to do. A lot of people come in from other countries that were oppressed, so we're not about to tell them how to fucking vote. Everyone can do what they want. Earl Sexton was a bit different. He said, I'm telling you to fucking vote Labor. But vote for your jobs. That was the message. And basically that was it. We were there for about 2 hours and Dan spoke about an hour of it.
Who knows, maybe a bunch of them who protested against the CFMEU and the ones who apologised for being so late to the freedom movement decided to look after themselves first and foremost in the end. Remember that SERP guy who said to a protester that he hated doing what he was doing, but that's all he could do and he had to feed his family. People might just prefer to look after themselves generally, even if it means more catastrophic debt for Victoria. 27. There are roughly 60,000 government employees directly working in the government. Once you add in teachers, medical staff and other groups, you get over 350,000 employees. Then add in all the tradies who will be employed to work for decades across various projects for different companies. They all vote. Not all will vote Labor, of course, but a lot of them will. Their job depends on Labor staying in power. 28. There was a pitifully weak Liberal opposition. Pitiful. An absolutely disgraceful debate effort from Matthew Guy. I heard inside goss many months before Guy was put back in at the helm that he was going to be put back in at the helm against Andrews, even though Guy lost so poorly last time, and that their goal for the election was to try to lose as few seats as possible. They were never really committed or convinced they were going to do any better than they did last time, and instead they appease and push the climate change agenda as hard as most socialist parties. 29. You have a lot of people who will vote Liberal no matter what because they don't want to see the Libs get weaker. You also have those who either voted Libs first or second after a liberty-orientated minor party. The reality is that it may be 2 elections away before the Libs are either restored to actually fighting for liberty or are completely lost. 30. Some very solid Liberals were elected though. 31. We have the 8 voting regions which prevents the votes from across the state accruing to more deserving folks. If we got rid of these regions, the voting results would be interesting and more representative of the Victorian people. 32. We have a preference system that ends up helping major parties, meaning Labor and Liberal suck up a lot of the votes from people who didn't really vote for them. 33. There are still masses of apolitical people out there who make up their minds of who to vote for on election day or days prior. 34. Many voting booths were left void of liberty-loving volunteers. People didn't volunteer for a number of reasons, but one that was odd was that volunteering was a conflict of interest. I even heard one conflict of interest person complain that there was no one handing out how to vote flyers at that person's local voting booth. So we missed out on influencing a lot of people who were making up their minds in those last few days. 35. Mulgrave was certainly covered for volunteers for Ian Cook, a tremendous effort. It did seem that many more were voting for him, and it did feel like he was getting a lot more votes than he did. Was there some underhand corruption? Possibly, but there's no evidence. But I would say with confidence that Ian Cook was somewhat used by the Liberal Party to bolster their vote. 36. We had parties working with Glenn Jury, the snake oil salesman preference whisperer. Liberty parties working with Glenn Jury would preference terrible authoritarian crossbenchers as a strategy to prevent Green MPs taking the last available spots open and to also try and make sure they got 1 or 2 people elected in their own party. They would preference socialist parties before liberty parties because otherwise the percentages they claimed would just not add up. 37. We lost 2 Lib Dems. They were elected last time because of the Glenn Jury model, the Glenn Jury bloc, who also gave us Medic and Barton, but not 4 Greens. As these people were elected by playing the game, they didn't survive this time. And there's other reasons for that too. I don't understand the long game of this either. Perhaps it was to keep having a couple of good ones and a couple of terrible ones among a sea of Labor and Liberal, and over several elections the numbers would eventually build up. 38. Once it was discovered just how snake oil salesman Drury really was, saying he would do anything to prevent freedom parties from winning, votes were changed at the last minute away from the Lib Dems and others. 39. We had an attempt at an ethical bloc where all liberty parties would preference each other first, but it didn't work as others were already on the Glenn Jury strategy to get 1 or 2 of their own over the line. 40. The Liberty vote was fractured across these 2 blocs. the Glen Jury bloc and the ethical bloc. 41. Medic was in the Glen Jury bloc and then tricked them by changing his party's preferences at the finishing line. So the Lib Dems didn't survive for a few reasons. 42. We now have Greens, which was inevitable in my opinion, and we also have more Nationals. Whether the Nationals will be any good remains to be seen, but it's an interesting result. 43. The suburbs of Melbourne are very ethnically diverse. Remember Jerry? I interviewed him ages ago. He was talking about how Labor use Africans and others to get their vote. 44. We have a lot of new Chinese people who have vastly different views from the old Chinese who have been here since the Gold Rush days and the Chinese people who left communist China late last century and this century. How do they vote, the new people coming in? I have no idea, but I don't think they are super liberty focused. 45. Labor seem to love the Chinese Communist Party, though not Chinese people, it must be said, and have a special ability to overlook the Nazi Germany-style treatment of dissidents over the last several decades, Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, Falun Gong practitioners, who it was recently discovered are making a portion of our lovely planet-saving solar panels. 46. You have people that loved the lockdowns, by the way. They stayed home playing on their PlayStations and were paid to do it. They disliked their job or life choices and it was a great holiday. Again, if they were aware of the portion of the suffering, they might have voted differently. 47. I've just returned from a YouTube ban and was grossly reminded of just how mega social media companies have worked to prevent people from knowing about so many things over the last nearly 3 years. These mega social companies who worked with the WHO and Davos peeps suppress, propagate doubt, propagate agendas, suppress truth, suppress any narrative that prevents people from knowing anything else other than the approved opinions, the approved agendas. Not only on medical stuff, but also on climate realism stuff. Now everyone is warned by the United Nations about climate realism factual videos, even on my channel. So many in the public sphere remain unaware and biased because of what these social media giants have done. This affects how people vote, or don't vote. 48. The richest of rich people who want to support independence or liberty parties can only donate a maximum of $5,000 over a 4-year term, while Labor can be backed by unions with many hundreds of thousands of dollars going into campaigns. That's somehow legal. 49. There is corruption within our society, but you are facing actual repercussions if you really go digging. Don't forget the bikies outside the CFMEU building flashed their concealed weapons at the protesters, and then police came to protect them from the protesters. Tradies also were encouraged by other tradies and bosses to vote Labor because of their future jobs. Thanks guys, a big help. 50. You had people turning up to protests and such who were never going to vote because they believe the whole system is corrupt and indeed the election was always going to be corrupt and rigged. How many are out there who didn't vote? I have no idea, but I have definitely met them and some of them have audiences. 51. Some people who turned up to protests and were indeed some of the loudest were off the cliff conspiratorial and indeed turned away others. 52. You have influencers pushing a similar fear that COVID fearmongers pushed. Our skies are being poisoned by chemtrails. I debunked this about Lismore, and pretty easily I might add, but they create their own fear porn and off-the-cliff conspiracy, and it's more interesting and believable than facts, it would seem. But these people shouted from the rooftops without evidence and without proof, and then endorse certain liberty-loving parties, and this turns people off. Same for the LRAD folks in Canberra, and the 5G is the end of the world people. 53. Protesters and influencers also affected the vote in good ways and in bad ways. But I'll go into this in another video and some things about the freedom movement in general. Some things need to be addressed to move forward with more effectiveness. Anyway, this list could be longer. Was the election rigged? There's no proof of election booth rigging, but yes, rigged in a more social engineering sense through a range of efforts. Certain influencers are claiming corruption and election rigging with no evidence though. But once people who think it was rigged start talking to the common man outside of their core groups, they will have to face the reality that a large part of society doesn't share their views. This isn't because people are all terrible or immoral, they just largely don't know about any of the hidden consequences and suffering that went on, and their consciences have been pulled in one direction for years. Many are in Plato's cave and need help getting out, but you can't really get someone out by screaming at them about the most sinister things going on. Something that really brought a lot of people to the streets was when the Andrews Labor government went after the kids and his omnibus bill. You don't have those with mega audience reach on your side. But their mega audiences all have individual consciences. Their consciences have perhaps only heard a biased opinion. So converse with people outside of your comfort zone. Start with explaining something relatable, such as the hidden suffering of children over the last 2.5 years. I mean, who is really going to keep dismissing the suffering of children? After years of conditioning, it might take someone a few times to hear about this, and always explained in a civil and calm, matter-of-fact way before any seed of doubt eventuates. And then they start questioning, and once they start questioning, they are more likely to come on board and then may tell their circle of friends or use their form of societal influence to inform opinion. If people were happy to go along with everything that we've been through over the last 2.5 years to save elderly people, imagine what they might do to save kiddos at the start of their lives. Ask people, did you know hundreds of thousands of Victorians marched in the city streets just over 12 months ago? Ask people to question things, get them thinking. Don't overload them with facts. Be civil and respectful, and don't have any expectation that you are just going to convince them. Just pick one solid thing and keep bringing the conversation back to that thing when they divert back into their Plato's cave and conditioned arguments. You can't outdo their belief system, but introduce something that they have obviously not yet considered. Set yourself a realistic challenge and see if you can pull one person's conscience back to normality by appealing to their conscience. Thanks to everybody who has supported me over this journey. The True Arrow journey very much continues. In the last couple of months, I've earned a whopping $26.21 from YouTube ads for my Christmas bonus. If you would like to help support this channel, please see the options in the video description. I'm also going to make a video about the Communist Party in China and their continued efforts on zero COVID. They are not backing down or stepping back as we're being told in the media. Some very crazy stuff happening there. Stay tuned. Peace out. Sam.